I think we need to give kids more credit. I think they are capable rather, of understanding much more than we think sometimes. It's amazing, actually. And my experience with kids of all ages is that they're absolutely not confused. They want clarification, they want understanding, and they can then move on and use that language in a respectful way. I mean, I have kids asking me questions all the time. You know, what does pansexual mean? What does omnisexual mean? They do hear this language, but once given a simple explanation, they're cool with it, and they move on.
I actually wanted Reverend Taylor to just speak about, everyone in this room has a different take on this. And something that I've been hearing a lot about in the community is, how do I have a religious discussion respectfully? And can you kind of touch on that?
Yes.
And how do we approach it? What is the most productive way to approach this?
Yeah.
And how is this subject being talked about in church as well?
Yes, these are good questions. My job, I feel, as a religious leader, and particularly as a Christian, that's what I am. I'm a Christian religious leader, so that's what I can speak to, is that religion exists in our world in order to ensure that the marginalized of this world aren't forgotten as society moves and develops and grows. Through the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, God's law ensures that the widows and the orphans are cared for, those people who otherwise wouldn't have a support network. In James, which is one of the letters in the New Testament, pure religion is this, to take care of widows and orphans. And so I see my job is to keep my eyes open, and a religious person or a Christian's job is to keep their eyes open to see who in our generation is the marginalized, and to find ways to ensure that they are not left out, abused, ignored, harmed in any way. I see SOGI 1 through 3 as a way that our education system is doing that very same thing, to ensure, looking around, that people aren't being hurt. There is great religious debate when it comes to human sexuality. I'm part of a denomination called Anglicanism. We've been debating human sexuality probably since the beginning of time, but certainly for 30-some years. We still are debating human sexuality, and in some ways that's disappointing, but in other ways it's good that we're still talking about things that are human and real, not just keeping our heads floating in the clouds of God and heaven. We care about real things on earth. When we engage in conversations about human sexuality, often our fear gets triggered. Our fear about what we know for certain starts disintegrating, and we don't have anything to hold on to, because religion also offers that, something to hold on to. And as you engage with somebody who might be feeling that thing that they've held on to for so long is disintegrating in their hands, they might respond out of fear, which means in violent language and in violent ways. And I don't mean physical violence, I just mean very strong reactionary ways. And so our jobs, I think, are to take a breath, deep breath, with the person we're sharing this important information with, to take a deep breath together and to breathe out fear, so that we all can kind of be on the same page, on the same footing when we're talking about these very important human issues. I get discouraged when the religious rhetoric becomes so antagonistic that people are thrown from communities or feel like they can't be in community. And so I am here to offer another alternative view as a religious person, that we can have these conversations and these dialogues, and these beliefs and still maintain a connection to our Creator and a connection to a community that cares for us. And for those who are engaging in conversations with neighbors that are concerned, that have maybe a reaction to this curriculum, I would encourage them to print off the first lesson. It's not okay to say that's so gay, which is the lesson I understand or that goes through all of the grades, K to 12, and to sit down and do that lesson together. It is empowering. It is the curriculum the child will be engaged with, sorry, not curriculum, but the resource the child will be engaged in, and then everyone's on the same page in the conversation. I would suggest that if in conversation with someone who is expressing their opinion in maybe a religious way, that the phrase sources say comes up, or studies say, that we just be cautious and maybe even suspicious that I'd like to see those sources. I would especially be cautious if someone says to you, the Bible says. Because if you hold up the Bible and put a microphone to it, it doesn't say anything. The Bible is interpreted by people of faith, and it can be interpreted in ways that hurt, and it can be interpreted in ways that heal. And let's choose the second over the first. What we can expect from religious leaders in this conversation, I believe, quite truthfully, is a loving, peaceful, joyful, patient, good, gentle conversation. These are spiritual words that are used to describe someone who's a Christian. And if you're in a conversation and those words don't match what's being said or how they're being said, we can question that.
Sorry guys, I have a question, and I'm going to ask it.
Go for it.
Because we're talking about religion right here, and in Langley, I don't think we're different. There's Vancouver, there's Burnaby, there's Coquitlam, and then there's Langley, Abbotsford. There's a large religious community here, and I feel for a lot of people that feel that this SOGI 1, 2, 3 is attacking their religious views. They have faith, and that is important, and I respect that. And I'm not a religious person, but I respect that faith. So is there a way in your mind to reconcile, I have my child in a public institution, how, and my question is for you as well, Matt, how, from your point of view, can I reconcile and still have my child take part in this wonderful education system? And is it possible for, I've heard this asked so many times, well, I'm going to pull my child out. I think as we've all heard, there's nothing scary going on in class, but how would that concern, if a parent said, I want to pull them out from this certain lesson plan? Are there contingencies there?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's a nice easy one, thank you. So I can speak directly to what I experienced last year. So my school, our staff decided that we were going to make an effort for every class to have some type of SOGI lesson. For the most part, it was family diversity and gender. So that was going to happen over the last term. I sent out a letter. It borrowed some of the language from Langley, the letter that went home to the families in Langley.
Yeah.
Also made it specific to the Delta policy that we have and what we believe in Delta. And I had a family that I had engaged with on this topic earlier in September. And what we agreed on, because they were, Christians, and I grew up going to church. Like I have that perspective as well. I'm thankful that I went to church, and I have that because it's, interwoven in so many things within our society. And I have that understanding. So I understand that perspective as well. So what we did is we chatted because they were a little concerned about a lesson that had happened the previous spring, so we chatted in September because we couldn't meet. And what we did together, because we weren't going to agree on everything, but we found a common ground, which was we wanted every child to feel safe and included in the school. And I wanted that family, who I disagreed with on a couple of things, to feel welcome at the school. So we agreed that that was the common ground. And we also agreed that we would let the parents know if we were going to be doing, if this was going to be formally introduced, because we weren't at the point there, it was actually before the minister had introduced SOGI into the Code of Conduct, or actually mandated it. That was in the Code of Conduct for every district. This was last September, end of September. So I said, well, what I will do is, we're going to be working on this as a staff. I will advise the parent community. So when I did send out that letter, which was a number of months later, I followed up with that family and said, I just want to make sure you got that letter. And their response was, thank you for sending the letter. And I expect the next statement was, we were going to keep our child home. It was, because now we've had the conversation at home, and we want our children to be there to hear the conversation at school. So they could have that conversation, so we're respectful of the fact that they wanted to be, have that education at home, but they also wanted their child engaged. And we found the common ground there is we wanted everyone to feel safe and included at the school. I had a similar conversation with a staff member who was at another school and was having similar questions based on faith. This was a teacher who had been a former pastor and was heavily involved in church. And once again, we found that common ground. There was a reason why he was a teacher. He was hypersensitive to the needs of people. He wanted to support these students, but he was having that inner turmoil. We didn't agree on everything, but we did find common ground that he wanted every child to feel safe in the school. And that's, so in terms of, people trying to reconcile that, this is not a lesson that's happening every day. It's not a weekly SOGI test or spelling test, right? There may be 1 or 2 lessons over the course of the year, but it also opens the door for, random teachable moments where, a child comes in most intermediate classes, there's some element of current events. Well, this is a current event. This comes up every once in a while. So there's a willingness now to have that discussion every once in a while and follow up. But it's not, and it's been portrayed, and I made the mistake of following some of the social media as though this is a day-to-day indoctrination that's happening. It isn't. We're opening the door for a discussion and recognizing that these people are in our schools and they've been underserved and under-recognized for too long.
David.
And I just want to highlight, in terms of folks who are trying to reconcile some of their spiritual faith-based beliefs with an acceptance and affirmation of LGBTQ plus folks, there is an annual conference that happens just down the road in Vancouver. It's called Spirit Pride. And it happens in late July of each year, and it brings together faith-based leaders from across many, many different denominations, Christianity, Islam, Hebrew, and on and on and on. And so I would encourage folks to consider accessing those resources and to think about how you can expand your horizons. I'm a strong believer that we're all lifelong learners, and so are there opportunities for you to reach out to folks who are going through maybe similar processes or have before in terms of how they're reconciling their beliefs with affirming LGBTQ plus folks.
Do you have more questions for me?
Is there anything you want to add or?
Questions?
I feel
Okay.
like that was great. Thank you.
So should we start?
Should we open the floor to
Yeah.
questions? Okay.
So I think what we'll do is we'll have, try and keep this orderly, but if you have your first question, do you want to come over here, sir?
Okay.
So we've got this mic here for questions.
The mic is working.
Do what you can to answer. So maybe just before we launch into questions, I'll just, because I know some people came in a little bit late, so just to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of the code of conduct for our meeting, that this is time for questions rather than for statements, and we're not here to debate the SOGI 123 resources, but we're here to gain more information and insight. So that's that. First question, please.
Okay. Well, the foundation for all of this is what God has to say about it. We have to recognize that.
So I'm sorry, I
And
don't want
God
to interrupt you
says in
early
the
on,
book
but
of
I'm just going to
Romans,
ask
chapter
for
1,
your question rather
He
than a statement.
says that a homosexuality is unnatural, and he condemns it. Now, if that's the case for a
Okay.
particular child,
Do you have a, I'm
then
sorry,
the
sir, do you have
only
a
thing that will
question? I'm going to
help
ask
him
you
will
to
be the
use your
one
time
that.
efficiently.
I'd like to see what
What's
the
your
panel
question?
has to say about that.
That wasn't a question, I'm sorry. Could you be a little more specific about what your question is? What did you want to ask the panel?
My question is, as a panel, what do you have to say about what God says about homosexuality?
So,
Okay, I think maybe we'll just bring that to,
yeah, we'll ask.
Dave.
They're not really qualified.
I don't think the
We'll
rest
ask
are going to be able to
them.
answer that question to your satisfaction, but we'll go to our resident expert.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. What does God say about homosexuality? It is an important question for people of faith. It's an important question for people of a variety of faiths. And it is a question that is not easily answered because there are many interpretations of our faith traditions or our Holy Scriptures. And so I'm going to speak of the Christian tradition. We do read in some of the New Testament that some things that we might call anti-gay or anti-homosexual rhetoric. That is a matter of interpretation of an ancient text that was written in an ancient language that uses contemporary language and often antiquated language in order to describe it. And so I don't think with confidence, and many biblical scholars would agree, and I'd be happy to give a resource to those who would like a resource on how to interpret Scripture when it comes to LGBTQ issues. I don't think we can say with confidence that God condemns homosexuality. That would be a particular interpretation of Scripture that many scholars, myself included, would not agree with.
Does anyone else have any questions? Do you want to come in?
So before I ask my question, I just want to say I really appreciate you all coming. And I think I've gotten a greater sense of how you each individually feel, and it may be a broader perspective of a lot of kids in the system that have really suffered. So thank you for that. My question is that if we are truly wanting to be inclusive, why is it that when we want to hear what might be the other side of the question, controversy, we have to admit there is a controversy here. When there was a reference made to that controversy, what are the facts there? Jill, you referred to it as that's a hate group. And I thought, here's a situation where you describe them as being a very small group. They're just a small group, and so it must be wrong and hateful as compared to the larger group of medical professionals out there, and so let's just label that hate. And it seemed to me strange to come from you, because I think the whole point of this evening is we have had a group of individuals who haven't been well represented and have been called names. And all of a sudden I'm hearing a reversal that concerned me.
Sorry, could you ask your question?
Yeah. So I was just going to say, just because we have limited time,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that's okay. So is the question then for Jill, what makes that group, or why did she say it's a hate group, and if
Yeah,
she
so-
could explain how that's a
Yeah, I would say
hate group?
how can SOGI 1, 2, 3 represent inclusivity to include research that might be controversial to your position?
Okay, so I think I'm hearing really different questions. So do you want us just to leave aside the question of whether that's a hate group then? I think that's a nice clear question, and I don't know that SOGI 1, 2, 3 can. I think those are separate issues. Okay, so maybe Jill can touch on both if it fits in.
I'll try my best to respond to that question, and I want to clarify that my response to that question represents me and my experience related to my learning and where I am. It doesn't reflect the SOGI 1, 2, 3. It reflects my work in working with trans and gender nonconforming youth, and my experience recently at the Gender Odyssey workshop, where I sat with professional folks who are doing a lot of research in trans health, and the deeming this particular group a hate group was me paraphrasing several law societies in the United States that call that particular organization a hate group based on their endorsement of therapies that are actually considered and deemed to be harmful, such as reparative therapy and conversion therapy. The evidence is out there. I don't have to cite it in terms of reparative and conversion therapy, that it really isn't a debatable issue. The evidence of harm using those types of therapy it's been refuted. It's seen as unethical in every psychological profession, every major psychological organization. And so that's not my opinion, that particular issue, that particular group endorses practices that are unethical. So it doesn't have any credibility. We could debate whether it's a hate group, but there's certainly organizations that call it such because they're supporting practices that are considered unethical. So that's for me, that's not specific to SOGI. The other piece of your question, I think I need to get some clarification as to, it was a large question, and I was thinking about the hate piece. So it was yeah, I'm not sure
Yeah.
that question.
So I think in terms of the question about how this links back to SOGI 1, 2, 3, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I'm not aware of any SOGI 1, 2, 3 resources that talk about the American College of Pediatricians, is what they call themselves? Yes, the American College of Pediatricians is not part of any of the SOGI 1, 2, 3 learning resources, so it's not the case that SOGI 1, 2, 3 is teaching students about the American College of Pediatricians or its approach to any of these issues. I think it's a false connection there that I don't think we really need to be.
I don't know if this will directly address your concern, but to provide some balance, I taught grade 6 for a number of years. We always talked about religion. We taught about Christianity, Islam, Buddhism. Like, there's some balance there. So this is one more thing that we're talking about. SOGI 1, 2, 3, or sexual orientation, gender identity. It's not at the exclusion of religion. We're talking about that as a feature of society and civilization. That happens in schools. So this is something that we're adding to fully represent everyone that's in the schools.
Add to that, or?
No, we're going to go to the next question, yes.
A question? Any
Yes,
other
do you
questions?
want to come to the microphone?
Hi, thank you. I think to expand maybe a little bit on what she was trying to say, when it comes to this idea of acceptance, like these words are used, acceptance, tolerance, these sorts of things, I guess what I'm curious about is if somebody who does have a different opinion on this particular issue, and I'm not saying, like, I think the solution to this is love, right? But when it comes to somebody having a differing opinion, what are your thoughts on if is there support for those people when they don't necessarily agree? I'm not saying that you're not accepting of these, of the LGBT, of that belief. I'm just saying, if somebody was to disagree with that, is there support for those students as well? Not necessarily saying that they reject them and they don't want to be friends with them. I'm saying, is there support for those students who don't necessarily agree? Are they labeled as not being tolerant or acceptable? Because there are varying degrees of understanding or belief systems or things like that. Is there support for other people who don't necessarily agree with that train of thought?
So for example, if there's a lesson teaching about diverse families and the lesson says some people have one mom and one dad, and other people have 2 moms, 2 dads, or 1 grandmother, or whatever.
Or the belief that homosexual is acceptable or not.
So there's just to be clear, there's not a SOGI lesson that says, now students, I'm going to teach you that homosexuality is acceptable, right? So, but to take an example of a SOGI lesson that does exist, right? If there's a lesson that says some people have families are all about love, and sometimes that means you have two moms, two dads, a mom and a dad, a grandfather who raises you, and those are all different kinds of families. So if there's a student in the class, say it's a grade 3 class, that an 8-year-old student who says, you know, they put up their hand to contribute to the discussion, says, well, I actually don't think that those families that have two moms or two dads are okay. Is your question then what?
Yeah, like
What's the conversation
is
with
that
that?
also accepted though as a differing belief? Like, or are they labeled as being intolerant and unaccepting?
I mean, I'm gonna
I guess
give
that's
you-
what I'm
yeah.
kind of wondering.
I'm gonna give you my perspective as a human rights lawyer,
Yeah,
and then
no, for sure.
I'll let Matt speak on behalf of the actual SOGI 123 program, and that's that I don't, and actually as a former educator, I don't think that it would be right for a teacher to say, it's okay for a student in this class to have two moms or two dads and feel safe, and it's also okay for another student in the class to say, it's not okay for you to have two moms and two dads. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a student holding that belief, but I don't agree that there should be a safe space for people for students to, you know, express those views to other students in a confrontational or negative way. So I don't know specifically, maybe this is where Matt can dive in and say, you know, how is that dealt with by the Educator Network and so on, but I'm wary of us drawing a false equivalency between making it safe to be a child in the world who has same-sex parents versus, you know, who may experience that kind of discrimination and rejection in the classroom versus being a child who has a belief that that's right or wrong, right? We all have our own beliefs about what's right or wrong, and holding them in our own minds is not hurting anyone, but you can't simultaneously make it safe for a child to exist in their classroom and feel welcome as a child with a same-sex parents, and make it safe for someone to say, well, I think your family is wrong and not a real family. So, and again, those aren't equivalent experiences for children. So I can't speak to how SOGI educators deal with that, and I have a feeling that's a hard thing for SOGI educators to deal with, but I think Matt can probably tell us more about that.
I'll try, but as you're speaking, and I appreciate you taking the effort to speak, because I think that's been an issue as I've been tracking the social media, is that people are maybe afraid to start because it escalates quickly, the comments, right? So I appreciate you being as sensitive as you can to the topic. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about a situation that parallels what you're describing too. So 2 years ago in a class, a teacher came to me afterwards because this topic had come up in current events, and someone had said something about a same-sex marriage. I think it was in the news, probably from the US, the recent moves in the US. And a girl who I knew, family, very close to the family, mom was super involved in the school, and great family to work with, but you know, they're devout Christians, and this was something she needed to share. Like, I don't believe in this, and she did, and as you described, she felt instantly isolated because the rest of the group said, no, that's wrong. That is, I'm sorry, because she just saying that it's, you know, she was quoting from the Bible and so on, and she lost a few of the group. And so for a couple days it was tense, so we were trying to manage that with her. But the analogy that I would use is if we were talking about racism, how much allowance would we give for that? Like, how much would we give for that? For someone saying, oh, I don't believe that that Indians should support, we should support Indians or Aboriginal people. And like, how much support would we provide as educators? And as educators now, we're governed by policy as well as the Human Rights Code. And we can't discriminate. And so they are bound by those. So as a teacher, you're bound by that. So you would have to, but I appreciate the sensitivity of it and what you're describing because I lived it. And I cared for that child. As much as I cared for the message and was concerned about it, I cared for that child because she felt isolated for a couple of days. And so we worked through that with the family. But it is a delicate one, and it's very real, what you brought up. But we're governed by the policy, Human Rights Code, and that acceptance. And so, you know, fortunately, we were able to work through that with the student, but it is a very real issue. Within SOGI 123, there are discussions that, and with the big ideas of the new curriculum, there are meandering discussions. The whole idea about eliminating some of the prescribed learning outcomes or things we're supposed to learn, a grocery list of things, is to provide opportunities for deeper discussion. And I'm hoping that will allow for that, so people get a more rounded understanding of this issue. That's what I hope. But I really do appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can just respond. I hear again and again in our communities this concern, and it's a concern among people of faith, that as one group receives the benefits of rights, it might infringe on my rights, maybe as a person of faith and what I believe in. So how can this person gain rights and I seem to lose rights? And it seems for the religious person or the spiritual person quite unfair and maybe even threatening. And maybe it's supported even by our religious leaders who are teaching us to be on guard against people who are going to try to take away your rights, your Christian rights. And me, as a religious leader, I want to use caution when talking about rights, because the Christian way often is one of giving up of rights, reading the New Testament. Being cautious of claiming rights in a way that causes someone else pain. The person of faith's responsibility, I believe, and you can take this or leave this, I'm not necessarily your spiritual leader. The person of faith's responsibility is to see how we can make space for the marginalized and ensure that they're cared for in our society and even in our communities of faith.
Next question?
Just going back to that earlier question about the child in the classroom, maybe saying that, I don't agree with the two moms or the two dads. Would it be equally concerning under SOGI, whether if a child were to say, I don't agree with a mom and a dad, so the heterosexual. So, because what I thought you were saying is it makes it inclusive for everybody, and that's what I wanted you to comment on. So creating a safe space for everybody, right? So maybe you could elaborate on that.
Sorry, the question is just about...
Well, the
So
question,
I think the question I'm hearing is that, is it the case that if a student said that they think it's wrong to have a mom and a dad, how would a SOGI educator respond to that, I guess is the question.
And you two know each other, right?
That's my mom, yeah, Sorry. I didn't tell her to ask that.
That's right. Planted question, and it's a difficult one.
Yeah.
No, and that's something that's come up on social media too, about we're eliminating the notion of mom and dad, and that is just not a reality. We're talking about, the expansive term of family and what that means, and so for someone to say, I have a mom and dad, great, let's celebrate that. I have two moms, I have just one mom, one dad, I have an uncle who lives with us. It's celebrating family and that diversity, and just fostering an understanding so that people aren't confined to that kind of nuclear family model that's, born out of the 40s and 50s of two parents, mom and dad, and then two kids, and it's beyond that. I mean, reality in the class, when I was a teacher and as an administrator, I see a lot of energy from families trying to hide what is actually happening in the family. And often I get access to that and I see it firsthand when the parents start crying, but they are maintaining an image for the community. And so for a child to share things and see, I'm not the only one going through some of these challenges, it's emboldening, it gives them strength. So definitely, mom and dad, I have a mom and dad. We're not eliminating that from the vocabulary in elementary schools, and if someone could post that tonight, that'd be great.
Any other
Okay,
questions?
great question so far, thanks Saleema. Yeah.
Come on up.
When you were developing the SOGI program, I wanted to know what mental health or child psychologists were involved.
Great.
Actually, it was built by educators for educators, so these are programs that have been in place for 20 years. But we've also tapped into the expertise in community groups. I have personally not engaged with any mental health workers to develop the lessons. These are lessons developed by educators for educators.
I find that concerning. I mean, we're talking about the welfare of our children with the program coming in, with all due respect to teachers or the groups of people that were discussed and looked to, you know, for information. That's
So what you seem to be suggesting is that this is an unfounded initiative, and we are all looking out for the welfare of all children, all children.
You know, Mr. Brothers, you made a point earlier that it was widely received. It's being widely received.
Okay, sorry, I am going to interrupt because it's a time for questions and to gather information.
Well,
And
it is a question.
one of the, sorry, I just want to finish. So one of the kind of initial matters in the code of conduct for this meeting is that the SOGI 123 program is in place, and the policy from the minister is in place, and we aren't going to have a debate about whether it should be, because it is. So it's also not the case that learning resources, whether they're about sexual orientation and gender identity, whether they're about math, whether they're about social studies, whether they're about religion, that they get vetted by mental health professionals in every case. So it's not mental health learning resources. It, you know, may have connection to mental health issues, but it's not a learning resource that teaches students about mental illness and things like that. So it's educators.
We're actually not dealing with people that are mentally ill. I'm sorry, I have to say that. It really upsets me. I don't have anyone in the LGBTQ community in my family, but we're talking about people here. They're people. Whether you go to church, don't go to church, these are people.
But we're talking about the fragile psyches of children.
But
that are being
what
Okay,
have we
sorry, even though Stacey's the organizer of the event, I am the moderator, so I'm going to ask that we use this time for questions.
Well, I think it's acceptable questions, but thank you for your time.
Okay, I didn't hear, I heard a question and you had an answer to it, but if there was another question, I'm more than happy to put it to our panel.
You've answered it, thank you.
Okay. Do you have additional questions?
If I could just address that.
All right.
I think you started with widely received, and I don't know that I provided full context at the beginning.
So it did start with our foundation, but then with Ministry of Education support, then the BCTF, and now we have partnerships that we're forming with the Trustees Association, with the BCC PAC group, with the Superintendent's Association. So that's why I say it's widely received, because we have the support of all the leadership groups, as well as 48 districts. So
But
it's been widely
You
received.
didn't,
Is it unanimous? No, and quite frankly, we're not going to get there.
well, you
But we're
didn't
gonna
allow
do
me to
this.
finish the question though, because it was widely received by whom? Because parents weren't involved in this decision.
And that is, they are working on that.
And we are now, and we're speaking up, but thank you.
Yes, but the curriculum, how many of you were involved with the curriculum, the new curriculum? That's been open for, that's been open for 3 or 4 years, right?
No,
And so there were opportunities there. This is a separate resource that we typically don't consult with parents. So the implication that you're suggesting is that we have to consult with parents on this because it's wrong. That's the implication. And
It's to do
that's
with
not a
the
road I'm
family.
going down.
If you're coming into the family, then you should involve the parents.
Well, the family, sorry,
We're not coming.
yeah, I don't see that. What we're trying to do is represent all families. And, you know, think about the math here. Families have their children for 85% of the year. We have them for 15% of the year. I know there's an opportunity for influence. However, we are teaching this lesson maybe once or twice. We're fostering acceptance. That's what we're doing. I don't think you and I are going to find any agreement. I believe we're doing the right thing, and it's long overdue.
Do we have more questions from the audience? Stacy has a question or wants to make some.
Is there an initiative? I know I can't make a statement. Actually, I know personally, until this happened, there were papers that would come to my home saying, this is happening, what do you think about it? Come to XYZ and the school board will be talking about it. I never went, I'm too busy. If they didn't need a check or a signed notice, it went in a pile. And then all of this blows up. And I have to ask myself, what did I miss? So are there going to be future more parent education? And I agree with you. I feel like this was rolled out, maybe not in the best way, but I also acknowledge the school board does the best that they can. So I guess my question is, will there be, I know from talking to the school board, they will be doing things, whether it's online or like this. But is ARC, will you be, will there be more
Yes,
available
so
for parents?
We've been meeting with.
Sorry, I just need to interrupt for a second. There's no recording of this event, please. Can you put that away? Thank you. This is not a.
recording the whole time.
She's recorded the whole session.
Okay.
She's been recording people's faces even when they aren't talking.
Okay.
She's been-
So let's, we'll talk about that after, because it is a problem, but let's get back to the general discussion.
Yeah.
So he's only recording, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have someone recording just the panel and not the audience. So I'm a little concerned because
And we
I've
announced
made
that
an assurance to people in the audience that they weren't being recorded. So I'm just concerned now that I have told you all that you're not being recorded, but apparently there is a recording. But I don't want us to get sidetracked on that, and we'll deal with that. But let's go back to the question about ongoing parent involvement or engagement.
So we actually have been working with Jen Mazai, who's the president of the BCC PAC, to come up with a strategy, whether it's through DPACs or PAC presentations. But we also have resources online that are ready to go right now for people to view. These learning modules are open to the
So
public.
I'm going to ask you to put the recording device away, as I just asked you to.
So not the panel?
Well, I can't see what you're recording, and I've assured everyone here they're not being recorded, and I'm not comfortable with you recording after I've told the participants here.
Questions and answers?
We have someone
I
recording
don't
it, and
consent to you
we'll
recording
share
me,
that.
and I don't
Yeah.
consent to you lying to me.
Been recording over my shoulder this whole
So
time.
please.
We'll
put
be
your recording
posting
device-
this whole event on YouTube,
Yeah,
and you guys can share.
yeah.
Sure, thanks Stacy. No problem.
Thank you.
So we are working with the BCC PAC to develop some resources and some presentations. But this is a resource for teachers. It's pretty rare that we go to parents to get guidance on resources for teachers.
Any more questions? I know this is so much fun. Come on up.
I just want to say thank you. I'm a parent from Chilliwack, and I have a transgender child. So this is really important for me to be here. But I am going to be a part of bringing the curriculum to Chilliwack and helping implement it in our district. And I want to know how I can help it have a good impact in our district and have it be positively impacted, so that hopefully it is receptive of.
So
I wonder actually, maybe Stacy can, do you have thoughts about that as a parent in your community who's trying to do what you can to help this program succeed here? Or do you want me to go to?
You go first.
Okay.
Well, I mentioned the network, and Chilliwack is part of the network, as is all of
Fraser Valley, actually. So we do have a district lead in Chilliwack, and the work's going to begin in high schools, I believe. So there are some things in place. So it's a matter of, if you contact me, I can put you in contact with the district lead and see what support, and I appreciate you stepping up to speak. Thank you.
Do you want to add anything?
No, it's okay.
Anything further? Okay, well, I really want to thank the panelists for sharing their time this evening, sharing their expertise. I want to thank everyone. I think we had really good questions. I know sometimes these conversations are hard, but I do really appreciate, people putting themselves out there to ask those questions, even when they're hard to ask and the conversations are hard to have. And I thought that was a beautiful comment that one of our questioners made, that really the solution here is love.
And we may have different perspectives and we may have different beliefs, but that we have that foundational belief that ideally we all share, that we heard our panelists talk about, that all children should be safe and welcomed at school. And we may not all have the same vision about how that happens, but we only get there by having these hard conversations. So it's wonderful to see so many people out here tonight. Stacey, did you have any final wrap-up comments you wanted to make?
I just wanted to thank everybody. I know I probably don't agree with a lot of you here, but I really respect you guys, and I hope we can get to the point where we realize we're talking about kids, people, and that, you know, what happens in our homes, no one is looking to come into our home, and whether it's my home or your home. And I really respect everyone here, and I thought we were all very well behaved. I'm sorry for my outburst. But I just thank you. Thank you all for coming.
And thanks so much.
And thank you guys for coming. I know,
Stacey.
yes.
I think we should also point out that school board meetings are typically public meetings.
Yes.
And you are always welcome to attend your school board meetings.
Yeah.
And that is a really awesome forum to specifically ask questions about these types of things. Now, they're very specific on how you do that and how that's put to the board, obviously, at that moment. But you can email directly ahead of time, and you may have information on who to contact.
And also the PACs. You know what? Forget the school board for a minute. I want to talk to my school, and I want to know what's happening. As much as I love the whole district, I think Langley, that's why we're all here. We love our community. And we're all good parents because we're here and we're concerned. But what about going to the school level? Our PACs, I know from this experience, they struggle to get parents to come to the meetings. So let's start at home, you know? Go to your kid's school, and I can guarantee you'll be accepted with maybe not ribbons, but
well, and everybody should have an opportunity to ask their questions.
Yeah,
I mean,
for
we're not
sure.
always all going to be on the same page and all agree in our beliefs or anything like that. But I think we're all agreeant that we have a right to ask the questions. We have a right to go to our teachers, our administrations, our districts, and ask the tough questions. You should never sit back and be like, well, what's going on? You should ask them the hard questions. And if it's uncomfortable for them, then so be it. It needs to be open for you to do so, because it's your kids in school.
Sorry,
I know I'm late, but I have a question.
Oh, well, I don't know. Okay.
Okay. When you started to say, good for you, I know that was a hard question. I'm shaking, and it's a really hard question. I have a super close friend. Okay, sorry, my question is, my close friend has a son, and he was my son's best friend. Sorry, I knew I was going to do this. And he came out a year and a half ago after being depressed and suicidal. He went for counseling, and he's come out and he is trans. And my son was devastated. He's not homophobic or anything, but he had said to his best friend, come to me if you have any problems, any trouble at all. I'd go to school with you and stand up to the bullies with you. My concern is that my girlfriend's son, my son's best friend went for counseling, and I also went to the other meetings, and Paul Dirks said that in a period of 2.5 years, some of these trans kids, 83.4% of them turn around and accept.
I'm sorry, can you ask your question, because we are
Okay.
after we're done.
Well,
Yeah.
you said that the other groups
I
that
need your question in about 10 seconds, because we're over time and we're
the
done.
question is, what do you do about de-transing
Okay, so I'm just gonna talk about that real quick because it's not part of the SOGI curriculum. There's no lessons in the SOGI curriculum that teach students about how to transition or how to change their mind. I'll just say there's a couple of misconceptions. One is that children are having sex change operations, irreversible treatments like that. Stacey's gesturing at me to be
I'm
faster.
sorry, no.
We're out of time.
Brad, I think there's a big misconception that a kid says I'm trans and boom, organs are being cut off.
Yeah, so,
Can
yeah,
Brad-
and that's just, sure, I think Brad knows more about that than I
I'm
do,
sorry
but
for the crude
it's a
statement,
long,
but
it's a long process. So I've had friends who've gone through this process, and it's a long process. There's counseling, there's psychological assessments. People generally live as a different gender. Children generally, when prepubescent children who are experiencing, questions about their gender identity, generally may delay puberty, so they have more time to make a decision. They won't be undergoing surgery. Maybe I'll just leave it to Brad, but if you can be quick, because this is a big tangent.
Okay, I know this isn't part of SOGI obviously, but I figured I have a son in the Langley School District who's transgender. I'll give you a quick, 101 lesson on what it is when you come out as trans in BC and a lot of other places throughout Canada and internationally and around the world. You don't just come out and say, Mom, Dad, I think I'm transgender. They don't come to you that way. They come to you saying, there's something different about me. There's something I'm feeling that doesn't align with my body or something. And you, as a parent, generally get counseling. You go to your family doctor, and down at some point, you might get referred to the BC Children's Hospital, where you get connected with your team of amazing professionals who slowly work through an assessment process that's internationally recognized that eventually will determine if your child is actually transgender or not. And at that point, all your options are laid out for you and your family to decide what's right for you and what's not right for you. And it is a multi-year, very long process to go through with all the checks and balances in place. It isn't a kid who goes to school and learns about gender identity and gender expression that come home and say that they're transgender. It does not work that way. The way that a lot of the other side is kind of fear-mongering or saying, this is very personal to me. I want everybody to understand that it is not what SOGI is teaching, but my kid goes to school, and programs like SOGI that are coming out now is going to make the path for these children way more easy for them to have a normal life. Because my son is very normal. You wouldn't know him to look at him. He's a straight A student, he volunteers, he wins films awards, he's very active social life. But we had to navigate our school system to get things in place 4 years ago that weren't there today. SOGI is the most amazing thing for these types of kids because it just makes them feel normal and accepted in our schools. It isn't a threat, it's not special treatment, it's just allowing kids to be normal kids and be accepted and have a normal childhood. So if anybody wants to talk to me after, I'll be glad to answer any question to put your mind at ease, but that's what I wanted to say.
Thanks. Okay, one last thing I wanted to say is you guys heard Stacey say earlier she paid for this out of her own pocket, so if you feel so inclined to chip in. Stacey did not know I was going to say this, but please do, because she's doing great work for our whole community and we should all support that.
We don't take donations.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
a
we
donation.
don't.
It's not an organization accepting
no,
donations.
it's okay. It's okay.
Okay, Stacey says no,
I
so you
don't.
can try.
I don't feel comfortable with that. I don't. I just don't want.
Don't give her money. Don't
Yeah. Don't. No, and don't give it to my husband either.
Or her mom. I'll give it to her mom.
Yeah.
So I'll replace that with just give her a genuine thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.